So we're going to try and keep it tight, not go over on this Wednesday evening. So thanks everyone for joining on time. I'm so happy to see so many of you all here, and I'm seeing the introductions coming in on chat. So please do keep that coming. I'm Akshay. I'm one of the co-founders at Dots. Uh, uh, the company where we've built this is called Uloy Labs, which is what some or many of you might be familiar with. Dots is our product where this is a product we've been building for the last 7 years, where we have this focus on how we can support teams to transform qualitative data, often unstructured, fragmented, into structured, actionable insights. And, doing that with your quant data, mixed method data, so that we can enable organizations to make evidence-driven decisions at scale. We've been doing this, as I said, for the last few years across a number of different domains. And I just want to quickly share with you a little bit about how Dots works, because that's going to be, let's say, anchored in when we talk about a few of the concepts as we go forward. So we basically look at the workflow in 4 steps: collecting the data, so bringing the data into a system, organizing that data on using a number of different methods, analyzing it, and finally reporting it. Not a revolutionary workflow. It is, I think, most of the workflow how you all probably look at it, but we also, set up a lot of our features in this way. And we have some additional features on enabling collaboration, integrating with existing systems. And just want to share quickly a few examples of how we've been, working with a few of our partners over the last few years. Make a difference, I think, doesn't really need an introduction, but in case any of you all don't know, Make a Difference works with at-risk children and youth through enabling volunteers to kind of work with them on a number of different things, but especially helping them, through their, educational journeys, right? But also building confidence, other sorts of life skills. What we've been doing with MAD over the last couple of years is helping to use a WhatsApp chatbot to enable their volunteers to share their experiences, but also through that chatbot adding data, which is used a lot for their MEL use case. And along with that, we have some integrations with other data systems that they have, so that we can pull all of that data relating to volunteers together to be able to really properly monitor and evaluate and learn from the volunteer experience. And that's something that we've been doing with Make a Difference. Um, we've been working with an organization called Global School Leaders, who work with partner organizations across a very wide geography, global geography, where they support their partner organizations to better work with school leaders, senior teachers, because they believe that that's where that's a very pivotal role in the school ecosystem. And what we've been doing with them for, gosh, now 3 years is enabling school leaders in these different geographies to tell stories in their languages. And all of that sort of comes into a single public publishing platform. And now slowly looking at how those stories can also be analyzed and, used for research and advocacy purposes. This is not from the education space, but I think a very relevant case study. We are working with Noura Health, again, been working with them for a few years. They work across a wide geography in South Asia largely and Southeast Asia, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Indonesia, where their programs run in government hospitals, where they train nurses to be able to share learning material and train caregivers of patients to take better care of them, right? And that's broadly their program. They work across multiple condition areas, maternal health being a very, very important one. And what we've been doing with them is a system in which different team members add different kinds of data into the platform. So their program staff who goes out to district hospitals, puts in notes from routine visits, other team members who go out for research add their research notes, and all of that qualitative data is annotated and analyzed so that the team has a single space where the knowledge from across the geographies, across teams comes together in one place. Um, so I think the question here is what we mean by qualitative data. I think, what we found over the last few years is that uh, when we speak to teams, everybody seems to have a slightly different understanding of qualitative data. And we'll go into that in a lot more detail, but I'll just leave you with this thing that when we talk about qualitative data, we don't only mean, interviews or focus group discussions that are very in-depth transcripts. What we also mean by that is, baseline or endline surveys or other sorts of surveys where along with quantitative questions, you also ask open-ended survey questions, which might have short-form qualitative responses. It could mean short responses that come through WhatsApp chatbots or other survey forms where people are self-reporting data. Or it could mean storytelling, putting tools in the hands of various stakeholders. That could be the actual community members that you might work with, it could be frontline workers, it could be program staff, it could be regional supervisors. However, your program is structured, it can be a very powerful thing to capture their experiences. And stories are not just success stories. I use this example, although I think I'm going to look the 40 years that I am when I say Asian Sky Shop. But those narratives of TV shopping, right? Like earlier I had this problem, then this intervention came, and now I have no problems at all. Those are not the types of stories we're talking about. We're talking about really what is that lived experience, the day to day anecdotal experience of what the challenges were, and which gives so much richness for us to understand what actually happens on ground. And that mess of ways in which we can get qualitative data together is what I actually mean by qualitative data. And that's just want to anchor the rest of our conversation today on that. Um, I'm also realizing I probably spoke really fast. Please put questions in the chat. I'm now going to hand it off to Yashna, my colleague and co-founder at Dots, who's going to take this conversation forward. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Akshay. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining on time and being here. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes.
Okay, one second. Yes. Super. So just to take this forward, and before we take this forward, just want to check on everybody in terms of at what stage do you usually think seriously about qualitative data? If you all can share in chat, is it at at what stage? Is it at a reporting level, at a planning level, at a collection level? When is that within your organization qualitative data is thought of?
National slide has gone back one.
Oops, sorry. Data collection. Thanks, Vineet. At the time of collection, planning level, research design. Oh, nice. There's somebody with a hand up, I think. Uh, all right. Thank you for the response. Um, and also, if you can answer this in the chat, is what is the intent of collecting call data? And I think just want to also say we have seen a lot of people talk about the intent as anecdotal, sharing success stories. Would love to hear what else. And if it's anecdotal and success stories, sharing success stories, please write those as well. But if there's anything else, would be happy to learn from you all. reporting and planning, everyone from all locations for case studies. All right. Thanks, Mahima. Anybody else? Anything? What has been the intent to give a sense of the why validating quantitative data? That's amazing. To cross-link the quant. Nice to actually understand what's behind the numbers. Super. That is great. That is great to hear. I'm glad we are talking to
No, I don't think
these
this
people in
webinar
the
is
room.
required.
This webinar is not required. Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad to read all these responses because that's one of the initial parts of what we want to cover is what is the intent of collecting call data and what are the problems that we often see with qualitative input. And usually these are the common problems that we hear is that you don't have enough call data or any or you don't have the right qualitative data. Only success stories are captured, but they don't talk to the research objectives because some of you, as said, there you get qualitative data at the collection stage. You don't plan for it. Often organizations don't plan for it. And I'm honestly very happy to read that a lot of you said it's at the planning stage. But a lot of people also say that uh, the call data is not enough to make a case. Nobody wants to read. Funders only care for numbers. And one of the bigger problems around call data is magically expect AI to give you all answers. I see Jenna smiling widely on that point because that definitely is one of the newer problems that, oh, we have some call data, we'll just put it all together and then expect something magically to appear on themes. These are the problem challenges, but the problem is not just that. The problem is also, did you design for a collection? Did you design for the right indicators to get captured? And that essentially is the gap, is that we deeply plan quant data for it to be planned around indicators. Baselines are done, inlines are planned, frequency is planned, dashboards are planned. And often we casually plan call as an add-on and an afterthought, which often becomes like it often becomes like a way for people to just add on an anecdote to the text. Or I'm glad to hear you said that you really want to find the why behind the what, but is that why included in the design stage? Often we see organizations miss on that. And if you can share, why do you like how do you design and strategize MEL system? Is it like a call plus quant approach, or what are the fundamentals of capturing data? Reporting, what else? Like, I just would love to hear what all are the ways in which you design MEL systems, if you can put it in 2, 3 lines or 1, 2, 3 words. Self-reported data. Could you elaborate? I think if you can just also talk about how do you design, strategize? Is it through call quant mixed approach? Is it that they are included, you're including the why as well in your design, or it's often that we have to project numbers? Would love to hear some points. So why track impact, interventions, effectiveness, how mixed model of call quant. Thanks, Vidhi. Understand impact for programs, usually mixed approach. Nice. Anybody else? Yes, Priyanka, such that it can capture the small shifts in feelings, experiences, the environment in which interventions are planned. Uh, Hi, Uma. Thanks. Theory of change, outputs, outcomes, robust indicators, feedback loops. Thank you so much for sharing that. And please let that coming in. I think what we wanted to express was also start with intent to include qualitative data at the design and planning stage, because that is where you need to understand what you want to learn and not just measure. So design the strategy to understand, design the strategy to learn and not just measure is very important for us to talk about what do we do with qualitative data and how do we do this, because often we've seen it's like like an afterthought or a comms team add-on that, oh, let me just add some qualitative data indicators as well on this piece. And when qualitative data, if not planned early, it can become extremely overwhelming and underused. But if it is planned at the right time, it is actionable and insightful for program design, for advocacy of for at the right place for the right time, because you've included that insight while collecting or planning the data. Um, every data system should start with definitely what decisions do we want to make. I feel like this group of people who've joined already know this, but also what do we need to understand, not just measure, is extremely important. And when we talk about MEL planning stage, what do we need numbers for? What do we need explanations, meanings, or to make sense of numbers for also as a part of the entire planning stage? Um, and the types of data that often come in when it comes to call data, Akshay did share quite a bit at the beginning. But I'll just go over what kind of data types we'll consider in the rest of the session today. And we won't go in the depth of collecting these data points at any point. While DOTS does have some components of collect, organize, we'll cover more on what do you do with this data. So just going over this a little quickly on types of data sources. There are short form data, as Akshay had shared. There could be in surveys, open-ended forms. We often just say it's left to that one field, but I think if we design that one field well, we know what are we trying to find. For example, absenteeism in schools should, the question is it a drop down or an open-ended field? Can we find more insights around that by keeping it open-ended? Can we use and leverage the tech to make sense of that data even at scale? It could be feedback snippets, WhatsApp chatbot input, app store data also, if this is, if you all have a product which has a lot of data coming in. And it can be all forms of short form data. And the second is ongoing long form data, which essentially is routine visits, field note, stories from stakeholders. Akshay, I think, shared quite beautifully what do you mean by stories, and reflections, observation, narratives, anything that is that your team, your field team has been capturing or your stakeholders want to share can be a part of call data, and we can design that well. We can make sure that that is structured in a way for it to be meaningful. So that being the second type, and this being the third one, which is focus research efforts, which often is left as the only call data that people consider, that is interviews and FGDs. But this is only one of the qualitative data. The reason why we wanted to share 1 and 2 was also to share that there are so many ways in which we can collect data. Uh, and and uh, and if there are any more, basically, for anyone who's tried collecting qualitative data in any other form, please drop that in chat. If you have questions, if this could be a call data, happy to attempt to answer those, or just keep it as input for others to answer. But consider, and as I said, we'll not go in the collection of how collection happens on the platform. We have the platform for setting up forms, templates, input from different types. We have a WhatsApp chatbot integration as well. So there are different ways we can integrate large size call data from other places as well. And there are different ways of doing this. But let's assume we have the collection layer sorted. Somehow an organization, we have convinced them to change drastically, seriously try to design qualitative indicators, collect data from each of those indicators, capture various forms of data, and they do this at scale. And now what? Like, what do we do with all this data, assuming that we have all the possible data from different stakeholders? How do we make sense of this? And we'll to explain and illustrate this, we'll take you through a case study. I'll give that back to Akshay for him to walk us through the case study and talk us through one example in the education space, and then we can talk about how and what sense making can happen over that.
Right. So essentially, what we did was that to help show you what this could look like. Obviously, can't show you something from an existing partner's data. So we thought up, what a typical uh, one type of intervention we often see in the sector, which is that there's a non-profit who partners with a state education department, and their idea is to support teachers in government schools, right? Teacher training sort of program, but the program is deploying non-academic curriculum. So social emotional learning, classroom engagement, student well-being, and really building the teacher's capacity to deliver that effectively. And in this fictional organization's journey, they're looking at about 1,200 teachers in multiple districts across 300 schools. And the idea is that, you know, this organization truly believes that success is not about the number of teachers trained, right? Like that old issue that we keep talking about, output kya hai, outcome kya hai, and all of that. They see teachers trained as an output of the program. They don't see that as an outcome. They don't necessarily count that as a success. What do they care about, right? Are teachers actually changing the classroom practice? What is the student's experience of these classrooms, right? Has that changed at all? Right? How is that consistent across different districts or contexts? How are teachers potentially contextualizing the training in their classroom? Where is it working? What are people still struggling with? So really getting into the nitty gritty, right? Not just to be able to say that पहले तो classroom में engagement नहीं था, then this training came, and now see, hey presto, there is engagement, right? We all know reality is far messier than some of those very plain Jane stories that we tell, right? So how do we really get into the depths of what a change classroom practice looks like and a student experience looks like with a combination of both quantitative and qualitative, right? So usually in a situation like this, an organization might look at quant data in terms of training and participation, some classroom observation scores with rubrics, attendance numbers for students, and coverage, right? How do you then use those three forms of data that Yashna talked about and add that into the mix, right? So, can we have teacher reflections before and after the program? Can we have facilitators also doing classroom observation notes? And can we, really have them talk to students, for example, do FGDs with a few students? Can we hear student voices? What feels different? And that could be either through an interview or short form responses, and really kind of saying, how do you then have teachers reflecting throughout a program, right? Or having conversations with this facilitator before and after. Essentially, what we're saying is that quant could look at things like training completion, observation scores, attendance, whereas qualitative could add a layer using teacher reflections, observation notes, student voices, and field staff reflections. And uh, I think the point is that very often we have a lot of data, but we can't clearly explain why something is happening or how some change is happening, because so many of us have also now started thinking in systems, in collectives, right? So we all don't have the ability to take our programs to every district, to every state. We want to be able to capture the nuance of what we're doing so that others can learn from it and scale those interventions so we can really, solve some of these issues. So what I'm going to quickly show you is, as part of this case study, what we set up, right? So this is an instance of the DOTS platform. We've put a bunch of different data sets together. Like I said, this synthetic data. So we cobbled together a kind of a structure for how we would capture data. So, let's say that, the classroom practice or mastery observation we are capturing before after, right? So maybe there were two data sets, one before, one after. We've merged that together, so we have a single thing tagged to each teacher, right? So the teacher has a unique ID, and we've got some quantitative data like this. Like I said, that we can then have facilitator field notes, right? So a facilitator is sharing what was the key highlight of what they observed before the program. They had a conversation with the teacher, and we've captured that as well. Or you have, for example, the teacher's reflections, right? And so we've again merged before and after. So the teachers talking about what were some of the challenges that they felt they had to overcome, and then what were some of the perceived changes in practice, and also, acknowledging that it's not all hunky dory, right? What are the ongoing challenges after the program has also finished, that duration where you're really observing things. And so this is how we bring all these data sets together on the platform on Dots. As soon as you bring that data in, immediately, zero configuration, all the fields start appearing. You can start analyzing it pretty quickly. And with let's say with things that are qualitative in nature, you start seeing summaries, you start seeing some categorization of short form qualitative responses. And so, what you're able to do is very quickly start getting into those aspects of things. I'll just hand this back to Yashna.
Yeah. And thank you for the questions. I'll try to answer those as well while presenting. So while we have, just adding over to what Akshay said, we have a lot of data. It's come on the platform. What is important is to make sense of it. And the idea is to reframe qualitative data from messy to actually using them as knowledge units. We need to treat each knowledge unit as something which is tagged to its source, its time, demographics, to whatever we can tag, because that becomes our first layer of structuring. And often we think that is not possible, that is not doable. How do we do this? There's a lot of information that we can have to each of our unit of information, be it observation notes, be it field diaries. Where exactly was this stored, at what time, by which stakeholder, who said what. So there are some of the meta tags that are possible for any qualitative data input also to have. For example, sorry, my slides are becoming a little messy. For example, like this is an example of a story, and it could be consider this as like an observation note, consider this as any input of call data, or even like a survey data, where every input is, say, has some meta information tags like which country, which school type, which state, any program supported there. Those help us tag your entire data piece to begin with. So even if there is nothing more and those simple demographics are available, it helps you structure your data against those demographics. The other layer which we apply over these tags is something which how we classify them as themes, sub-themes, and tags, which are applied across all data sets to even connect those. So even if your demographics, etc., are not enough to connect your data points, the way we structure it on the platform, or in general, any if you want to do this outside the platform also, is layer it with these themes, sub-themes, tags for it to be then discoverable across a theme. And each of your observation note, or like a fragment within a long story, can be tagged to this structure for it to be valid fragments for, or knowledge units, as I said, for it to be discoverable as knowledge units eventually, um, on on the way that you analyze data. Because call data, when lumped together, can be overwhelming. As somebody said, that there is so much data, it's not processed, but it's brought in, broken it down step by step, it becomes analyzable and queryable. And we can talk more maybe offline as well if anybody has doubts on structuring specific forms of data. Because I want to cover a little more on what happens when we have these lumps of data. And there is so much theory on how many types of analysis are there. There are thematic analysis, grounded theory, content analysis, narrative, framework, case studies, discourse. Like the list is unending, and it can definitely be very, very daunting. But how we break this down, if we again break this down, and the idea for us to is just break down, simplify. We just try to put it on in terms of what are we trying to accomplish. We want to understand what deserves attention. We want to see what issues are emerging from the ground. We want to illustrate priorities with lived experiences. We want to compare any data point across districts, time periods, implementation styles. We want to hold insights against each other because often there is conflict. It's not always a what and why, right? It could be that something in the metric says that, oh, 90% program success, whereas actually in the implementation, nothing really has changed, right? So we want to hold insights against each other and we want to track how narrative changes over time. So it could be anything. If we break down into these objectives, it again becomes easier for us to define how we want to analyze this rather than get into the theory of analysis that now I want to apply thematic or grounded, etc. So it's just our approach to handling qual data has been to break down to the objective and the answers we want to find, and then look at any kind of analysis. What we'll do is again get to the platform and walk you through the case study and how some of these reports essentially can be formed through these knowledge units which are on the platform. And Akshay, over to you to illustrate that.
So the idea, like I said, just kind of saying that we have all of these different data sets. The idea is that we've got a mix of quant and qual. I'll quickly first show you what happens when you just want to start. I showed you a couple of things around the overview dashboard and how you can start looking at some of that data at a data set level, just to get an overview of what is available to you. And then, the other idea is for us to look at, sorry, we have this feature around Ask AI, right? So you can start asking questions of your data. Here I've asked, what are teachers reporting as reasons for them not being able to effectively adopt practices in the classroom, right? And so you've got a bunch of answers here. And like Yashna said, we've heard from a number of people how they take all of their qualitative data, dump it into ChatGPT and hope for answers, right? And very often, the thing that gets reported are hallucinations. So essentially, very plausible sounding anecdotes or quotes, but there is a trust issue. And so what we've done is Ask AI is not magic, right? It's not going to give you the perfect insight. It's going to start giving you ways in which you can start understanding some of your data. And very importantly, it's going to show you what references it's used. And then you have the ability to go and understand and check on the reference, see the context, and really get into the details of what this particular person might have said in the rest of the conversation. And that becomes a very useful way to start digging into quant data. In our case, what we then also do is that we've set up a themes manager, right? Where we've done a tiered system, like we said. So we have you know themes, sub themes, and tags. We've also added some descriptions, and what we've then done is we've done an automated annotation of all the data that is qualitative in nature, especially long form qualitative, right? Reflections, interview transcripts, and we've got about 26,000 annotations across the whole thing. Very overwhelming. But before you kind of jump into looking at all of them, you can start seeing what the count is for your different sub themes, for your different tags, what is relevant. You can start getting a sense of what shows up more in documents, right? And this starts giving you some clues as to what is important, what isn't important. And very importantly, what you can then do is use your different filters to say that I want to understand, let's say, student experience and perceived outcomes. And I can filter for that. I can start going in and kind of start to read some of that. I could go deeper into it by filtering by some of the sub themes. Let's say student voice and confidence, right? I want to understand that a little more. And I start seeing some of the things that some of the students might have talked about. and further in, so you can keep going a little bit deeper, around asking questions. That's always an important one in a classroom. Uh, and then, as I'm reading, I'm still thinking, I want to get a sense of what's going on. And I can summarize, those annotations on the screen to see what are some key themes and insights that might be coming out of these particular annotations. Now, the idea of a setup like this is that depending on either a particular question you're holding because you've done the intent, or some patterns that you're starting to recognize because you've looked at Ask AI or the overview dashboards, you're able to start applying some filters and using these summaries to start understanding what lies within this qualitative data, right? Especially when you're doing it at scale. In our case, it is multiple data sets. As you can see, facilitator field notes, teacher reflections, student experience interviews, the teacher survey across 300 teachers across the program. So 300 teachers is actually a very small sample set. I'm sure many of you all deal with much larger samples. And this is where having these sorts of filters helps. If the data is structured correctly, like Yashna said, and it should be, you can start applying things like meta filters, states, and other sorts of things like demographic related information also as filters, right? And so this becomes a very important way in which one can look at this data. But this is again only the qualitative data. What happens when I want to look at quantitative data and qualitative data together, right? So from across the different data sets, what we've done is we've used the reports feature to put some of it together. Please mind you, this is all synthetic data, so don't look at the numbers specifically, because we pray to the LLM gods for high quality data, but you get what you get. So the idea is that from the classroom observation rubrics, right, we were able to do a before and after score. And here what we've got are three metric cards, right, that look at specific variables that we wanted to measure out of the program: emotional safety score, the participatory methods, whether how well they were applied, and what the student participation score was. And what we're seeing is what is the average delta in terms of the score, and largely it seems to be around 1. So in average, people move from a 3 to a 4 or a 4 to a 5, that kind of thing. We also look at what were some of the practices that were adopted, right? So much more in terms of participatory and activity based lessons, much less on structured student reflection on learning. So, you're able to see that. What's really important is that from the facilitators' field notes, right, their observations, what were the changes and improvements they saw? They saw that teachers were really able to bring in collaborative learning practices in a very, very big way, but not really on individualized student support or classroom environment management. Now, this is not something that they've tagged as drop downs, right? Essentially, these are responses that are open ended, and the system has then categorized them to understand broadly, what has been done. On the other hand, what we see are, in terms of teaching practice and change, right? Classroom participation, we saw even this one talk about collaborative learning practices, participatory and activity based lessons in across our different qualitative data sets. This shows a count of the number of times classroom participation was mentioned in the qualitative data. So what we're also able to do with qualitative data very often is quantify it, because if you start collecting it at scale, it can be fairly significant to be able to glean some insights from that. But very importantly, we can't only rely on the quantification, right? It then becomes important to also look at actually what were the teachers saying or what were the facilitators saying. In this particular widget, we're looking at quotes from the teacher survey, and very specifically everything that had been tagged in the theme around teaching practice and change, and we're able to start kind of looking at that. Now, in this case, given that we don't have enough context on this fictional case study, We haven't added any specific text widgets to share our insights, etc. But you can just as easily add commentary as well. What this does is, even if you have ongoing data input, these sorts of widgets can keep, updating with new data, and you're able to start tracking some of that. I'll quickly show you one more report here. This is more around what the teacher experience was in terms of how they felt, the effectiveness of what they did, what were some of the challenges that they faced. So we start again with what were the practices that they adopted in their classroom. But then we come to a question where they were asked to talk about the effectiveness of the practices that they adapted or adopted into their program, right? So uh, 60% of them said that it was very effective in improving the classroom practice, but a 40%, fairly significant number, that it was effective in some situations, but not consistently effective, right? And then we had asked them what could have helped them to improve, right? What could have helped improve the effectiveness of these practices. And this, again, these are open-ended responses because we want to hear from them what could those points be. And many of them are actually talking about environmental and material conditions, right? And that's a important one. We all know, especially in government schools, how they're resourced, and some of those struggles around that. And so that is something that comes up quite heavily. But we also then, look at specifically annotations from their reflections, right? So this is when teachers are reflecting through the program, and specifically on tags around implementation challenges and mixed or negative experience of trying to implement these, right? And you start kind of seeing the actual things that the teachers are reporting in their work. And we also then said, let's ask a quick question, right? What are the teachers reporting as reasons for them not being? So this was the question I'd shown you earlier. And that answer also shows up here as a widget. And lastly, what we said was, let's look at what are some ongoing challenges for teachers even after the program is done. This is from the teacher reflection data set, and they've talked about infrastructure and resources, language barriers, attendance issues, parental involvement. I'm sure some of these things sound somewhat familiar to many of you all who work with this particular sort of set of stakeholders. So what these reports show us is that given a certain kind of planning that you do, coming back to Yashna's point about intent, how if you do that planning of intent, some of these things can come together really well. But to kind of elaborate on that, I'll hand that back to Yashna.
Yeah, thanks, Akshay, and to everybody. I hope that gave a little bit of glimpse of what we can actually do with qualitative data when it comes to scale and structure. And I think just keeping some time in mind, we want to leave about 10 minutes for questions. I'll just end with this on saying that some key points that we wanted to elaborate on was being strategic with qualitative data from the beginning. There are systems that are available to include it, and one of it is dots. There are multiple other options that you all can explore, but please be strategic about qualitative data. Plan qualitative data with the same seriousness as quant. Uh, the structure is one of the key points. While I think today's narrative is that dump everything, as I said, in AI and you'll get answers, but structure enables insight. Structure also is very, very useful for AI to process data, and together call and quant can really make sure that you can make better decisions, faster decisions at a programmatic level, at say a policy level. How do you report? So that's where we're going to end this in terms of leaving you all with this thought of design for learning and not just reporting. And then we can pause for questions, thoughts. Anybody wants to share anything, happy to hear your feedback. um, Jenna, I hope your question on I think Jenna shared, sorry, Nina shared the question around unstructured observation data and nodes. If not, we can happy to take this offline, or if you want to elaborate something, happy to discuss right now.
Thanks,
Awesome, Uma.
Nina.
Yes.
Would you like me to just add to that?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead.
I actually was just, as I was looking at how the platform is designed, it looks really cool, actually, very sleek. I was curious about the stage of getting your data into the platform. So I've used Deduce in the past and other, other software, but I find that that can often be the biggest kind of mess to deal with because you might have paper-based stuff, you might have things in different formats. Some platforms require you to convert your data into a particular type of format. And then, of course, we have various languages, handwritten notes. So, what you showed was, of course, very nicely organized, very clean. But I'm just wondering about the steps that come before that, so that you can kind of get to the stage of actually analyzing.
Yeah, I think thanks for sharing that, asking that. We didn't cover intentionally the collection layer because I feel we've done that in the past, but happy to share some examples of how this happens. There are multiple ways you can handle import, Nina, and it's not I mean, we're not going to discount on the effort of saying there are handwritten notes. How do you import that? That's a lot of effort for sure in different languages. What we have on the collection layer, though, one being on the platform itself, we can import through templates and forms. We also have a layer of language and translation available on the collect form. So if you added any language, which is, of course, we have a few integrations from Google Translate and other integrations that are available. If we have those languages, then we can translate it directly on the platform. But there is a little bit of effort in sorting out collection for it to systematically come on the platform through direct importing. So we have something called publish, so people can directly import there. Or if there is a system that exists, we build an integration to import data from, again, being a text system. So those are some thoughts, but I think 2 minutes won't do justice to what are the ways of actually importing and including data. Happy to set up a follow-up with you, Nina, if you think that's useful. And we can do a demo of the whole collect part of the platform as well. Any other questions? Akshay, you want to, the platform is not open source, but Akshay, if you want to add any point there.
Yeah, I think yeah, not much more to add than that, but essentially Mahalakshmi, uh the prod Dots is not open source. It's a
Okay,
SaaS
sure.
product. So we work with partners, and we have different models in which depending on what they need to use it for, we can kind of engage with them. Um, I think I'll just quickly answer Anamika's question. For those of us who don't have dots, what would be a good way to organize the data to enable systematic analysis and insight harvesting? I would say that come talk to us. Maybe you can have dots, but uh, the I think if planned correctly, I think you can potentially use Google Sheets, etc., to structure the data. But what happens when you use a tool like Sheets, etc., is that you have to bring a certain understanding of these types of analysis, the rigor that is required for that, and things. And so there is a little bit of jugaad that you would have to do to be able to use it for that, and a little bit of jumping through the hoops. But I mean, people have been doing it for forever. Um, but I'm a little bit biased, I
Yeah.
guess.
Just to add to that, Anamika, in case you have a use case, happy to chat outside of this where we can give some tips on how do you structure it. If the scale is smaller, what can you do to get started with even using qual data? I think our objective is for people to start using qualitative data and try to understand what does it mean to structure. So we can do it
To
outside
you,
in some ways. Sorry.
specific to Anamika's setup and
Use
need.
case. Yeah. So we can talk about that after the session. So please reach out if there's something we can help with, even without dots.
Uh, yeah. We
Super.
have about 5 minutes left. If anybody has
Um,
any questions or comments, or are we looking at call data as only text-based formats? Yeah, not at all. I think what we've seen is that people are collecting audio, through interviews and things like that. Uh, at the moment, we don't have a transcription add-on, but we're in the process of experimenting with building that. We do build it on third-party models, right, that do the transcription and translation. So if you are working with a lot of audio-based data, yeah, Umman, your question as well. So if you're working with a lot of audio-based data or the audio layer of a video, happy to chat and kind of figure out how, we can work with this new integration that we're building, and, see if that works for you. Yeah. So that is one thing. Second is that the the collect part of dots allows for individuals to add photos, caption them, tag those as well. And so we have some custom things that we build on that front so that you can kind of bring different forms of data in. At the moment, we don't do image analysis. So if you have handwritten forms, it's not going to automatically digitize that, because I know that some teams are using paper-based forms because of context and technology, penetration. But I think let's have a chat. I think there are some. We don't want to solve every problem because there are some great solutions out there which we can integrate with or find ways to bring data in or give data out, right? So where does dot sit within your larger sort of workflow? Garima is asking for where can you learn more about the platform? Drop us a line. We love talking about it, so we can share more. But we'll also share links to the website. And in terms of subscription and pricing, essentially we have three different tiers. So we have a starter tier, pro, and enterprise. The starter tier starts at about 3 lakhs per annum, allows for 5 users, a bunch of different features. And when you go into Pro, it supports with other more features, ability to deal with more kinds of data, things like that. At the moment, we're doing, because we know it's end of year for a lot of organizations, you are suddenly left with a bunch of data sets. And some of you will probably be planning your next year strategy workshops, year planning, retreats, and things like that in April and May. We are doing short form engagements with organizations to give them versions of the platform that they can use at 50,000 per month with a 3-month engagement. So that's one way in which you can do it. Pratiksha has shared the link in the chat. So in case you're interested in this, please, respond to that form and we'll be in touch. But thank you, Garima. That was a very, very well timed question. Yeah, so that engagement can be 2 to 3 months or more. And that essentially gets you access to Dots Pro and some support from us to get set up. Super. We are at 5 p.m. Any other questions? We're happy to hang around for a few more minutes. We will. So if you go to the Get Dots website, we also have the Insights Hub.